The Space God Memoirs. Season 3, Episode 4. Situated perfectly upon the southern pole of Kucingkecil's inner world city, the Archon's tower was a grand bronze cylinder, resting upon a disc-shaped base, its bottom an open entryway supported by 30 evenly spaced pillars. The upper half of the tower was lined in grooves, where light in a rainbow of colors flowed upward like so many rivers, eventually merging with the light of the sun at the hollow world's center. From about a kilometer away, I watched the tower, perched atop my floating hover disk, high above the city streets. Already, the participants of the upcoming Cyclical Meeting were approaching, either floating in on their disks or flying via their own abilities. In one corner of my mind, I kept an overhead map of the area open, watching each Naiar passing by as their map markers displayed their identities and info. A duo of avian rank 2s coasted by on their 8-foot wingspans. The black-feathered Orello and a white-winged Vilaska, chief caretakers of a nearby star system. The translucent gas-bag body of Huro Hurovowiki zipped past shortly after, the commander of the sector fleet. Today was the day. The meeting was to begin in less than an hour, where Archon Lumavari would emerge from his bardo slumber and convene with all the upper-tier Naiar in the galactic sector. Of course, that didn't include me. I was just an initiate after all, but I'd be at the meeting anyway. We do not know what the nature of the attack will be, Tabalnok's message had told me, but if my calculations are correct, the Cyclical Meeting will be the stage of their next incident. I have set up drones to watch the perimeter of the tower, but you are needed on the inside. And there he went. I watched as Tabalnok's burly elephantine body zipped by in a disk similar to my own, headed for the Archon's tower. That was my cue. I made sure my stealth mind was secure, and I coasted shortly behind him. I landed at the bottom of the stone platform surrounding the tower, and touched the side of my hover disk. It shrunk to the size of a small coin, which I had then placed in the pocket of my robes. At the entrance, a line of people was already filing inside. Stepping in behind them and keeping to my stealth mind, I followed the line as it steadily snaked in, beneath the pillared entry. Shortly after, the line began to diverge, breaking off into separate groups that went their own ways down various white-lit stone halls. Lots of meetings were happening today. The higher-ups off to discuss everything from military and finances to biodiversity protocols. I continued forward, my feet silent upon the muted floors. Near a minute later, I stepped into the great central room of the Archon's tower, the scene cast in a pallid light. In the midst of that expansive chamber stood a great throne host to an even greater figure. The form of a man, probably near 20 feet standing up. The giant lay back in his seat, his eyes closed, his pale, statue-like face wearing an expression of perfect serenity, as he sat utterly still on his immense bronze throne. The Archon was clad in decorative white armor, its muscled surface etched with hundreds of silvered runes, a crown of ram-like horns upon his head. The Archon Lumavari, the silent and passive lord of this world. He looked like a corpse in that chair, or some grandiose statue. He lived, but not always in that body. Since coming here, I hadn't seen him move. So I suppose he didn't need it all that much anymore. The Archon's expansive rank 3 intellect dwelt within the base's computer systems, constantly linked with the planetoid's mind, like I linked with that of a starship. He was everywhere on Kucingkecil, seeing through every camera, his presence directing the work of all the Naiar here, watching over the flow of Atra, but also dwelling within the maintenance, the life support systems, everything. I was sure Lumavari could see every memory or image I sent into the monad during my missions here, though I had never interacted with the Archon directly. Could he see into my thoughts? Through my eyes? For today's minutes, the Archon would soon emerge from his slumber. A rare occasion. But before that would happen, I had some work to do. I turned from the Archon and ascended the staircase that lined the outer edge of the chamber. On the second floor, I looked out over the balcony for a few moments, watching the flow of people entering and exiting the main chamber. The traffic was sparse, with most of the Naiar going off to their smaller meetings. Per the itinerary, the Archon wouldn't be waking up for another hour and a half. Plenty of time to get the layout of this place. Beyond the main chamber, the tower was a mazework of halls, meeting rooms, and corridors. The various floors connected by either short stairwells or high-speed elevators. Practically every corner and intersection was watched over by the silver Naiar, the lion-faced guardians as motionless and vigilant as ever. I spent some minutes just walking the halls, unnoticed as my aura of obscurity vibrated around me. At first, everything seemed in order. Various people walking off through their meetings, a few lingering in the halls. I paused momentarily as I saw a lone Naiar exiting one of the unmarked side doors in the hallway. A brown-skinned, super-thin being that reminded me of a collection of twigs. He stopped in the middle of the hall and began inspecting a panel to the side of a room's entryway. But I could tell just by looking at his movements and the messages in the monad above him that the man was a technician, just doing his job to make sure the security systems were working right. On to more duties. I strolled down the halls of the tower, occasionally looking in on meetings. There was some heated debate, a few raised voices, some sour expressions, but nothing suspicious. Suppressing a yawn, I glanced at the time. 45 minutes until the Archon's speech. A few more places I needed to check. I made my way around the halls until I arrived at one of the many elevator chambers. Stepping inside, I let the door shut behind me and mentally directed the elevator to descend down 2 floors. It opened into an expansive vault, where bundles of thick brassy pipes extended from floor to ceiling. Between them, neatly stacked in rowed, were hundreds of identical containers. The room smelled of metal and dust, its extremities cloaked in shade thanks to minimal lighting. This was one of the rare storage rooms in the facility, used to keep various goods that couldn't be disintegrated and reintegrated efficiently, mostly made of heavy metals. I stepped out, and the elevator closed behind me. I was the only one here. This floor wouldn't really be in use for the meeting, but it was the perfect place in this tower to go if you were up to no good and wanted a bit of privacy. I began slowly walking around the room's perimeter, glancing at the walls, the pipes, the boxes. I stopped in one of the boxes and gave it a tap with my foot. Mostly solid. The monad listed it as containing 60 titanium bars. I stopped, leaned a hand against the box, and listened. The area was silent, save for the airy hum coming from the ventilation pipes. There was an occasional clunk from somewhere deep inside them. Probably just the air bumping something around or a defect in the construction. No, wait. This was Naiar construction. They didn't make defects, and any obstructions would be quickly cleaned out by the nanites. I listened for it again. There it was, coming from somewhere behind me in the room. I walked that way, navigating around the neatly stacked containers. The sound was growing louder. I was getting closer. Bringing up a monadic program to visualize sound, I was able to easily locate the noise, coming from a bundle of metal pipes near the south wall of the chamber. The air continued to clunk, followed by a creak. Taking out my striker, I gave the pipe a light thwack. It rung for only a moment. Then the entire pipe structure shook, vibrating, its metal surface appearing to distort and wave. The vibration descended down the side of the pipe, looking like something was moving within, shaking the very molecules of the metal, accompanied by a scratchy shriek. It descended straight into the solid stone floor and was briefly still. I stepped quickly aside as the ground moved, shifting as if some creature were digging through it, warping the stone as it went. It darted for the far wall, and I followed, hurrying to keep pace as a grinding noise rang through the chamber. I stopped at the wall, the movement and noise now completely absent. As I stood there, staring at a blank wall, I barely caught a glint of movement. A blade stabbed straight for my face, springing from the metal and concrete. I was able to swivel aside at the last moment. The wall weapon immediately retracted backward, vanishing into the construction as if it had never been there, leaving behind only particles of dust that floated in the air. For a few more seconds, I kept my muscles tight, ready for something, anything to happen. A distant rumble from somewhere deep in the wall, getting quieter and quieter until it was inaudible, then silence again. What the scrag had that been? An unplaceable chill began to creep over me, a churning feeling in my gut. In the air, where dust still floated, another sigil appeared, just like in the electricity room, but this time composed of the dust itself. Not all is serene in the hearts of the Naiar. The corruption must be purged, came a message in my mind, emanating from the sigil, its voice like a raspy whisper. Then it faded, the dust motes floating to the floor. That was that. Nothing more to be had there. No more weird events. Soon it was time for the big meeting, and I once more found myself standing atop the second-floor balcony, looking on as the Naiar gathered around the soon-to-be-waking Archon Lumavari. Hundreds of Naiar congregated within the hall, people of all species and sizes, genders and varieties, from yugs who looked mostly humanoid like myself, to reptilians and furry folk, insectoids, and even a few with mechanical bodies. On a smaller raised dais next to the Archon's throne stood Overseer Dryafar, a gangly robed Naiar who served as the facility's more practical boss. "Greetings, citizens of Kucingkecil," stated Dryafar in his high-pitched, nasally voice, his triplicate eyes gazing out over the audience. "We gather in unison, planning the course of our great society, working on our shared vision. In moments, the most advanced being among us, the Archon Lumavari, will emerge from his sojourn in the local bardo, sharing with us all his words of wisdom to conclude this meeting." Dryafar raised one of his arms in the air. The metal walls rang, a heavy, gong-like sound resonating through the chamber. My skin tingled, my entire body shaking, as a vibration moved like a wave through me and everyone else in the room. As the resonance began fading into the background, we all paused, every eye focused on Lumavari, sitting in his chair, all awaiting his awakening. He remained immobile, his eyes ever closed, his giant's body not moving an inch from his throne. The ringing was now gone entirely, the chamber still, silent. A few people began to mutter in concern. Dryafar put a hand on his chin, looking puzzled, his central eye turning towards the seated Archon and scanning him over again. More muttering from the audience. "I'm afraid that there is a miscommunication," stated the Overseer, after near a minute of silence. "The Archon remains in his slumber." He waved a hand to stifle any chatter from the onlookers. "Worry not. All is well. Our sensors indicate Lumavari's life signs are steady. Nothing unusual. You will return to your regular scheduled duties, and you will receive further updates via monadic messaging. Thank you." I stared up at the giant's expressionless face. There was a sharp tingle in my gut. Something was off. Horribly off. Had the Archon died? Was he stuck somewhere out of body? The silver Nentael guardians were already moving about the room, directing everyone to depart and return to their scheduled work. Dryafar wore an unreadable expression as he hovered overhead, waiting for the other Naiar to leave. I began to walk, following the crowd outside, but taking one peek back at the Archon, still as a statue. I wondered what had just happened, and if it had something to do with that weird anomaly below, with the message. Not all is serene in the hearts of the Naiar. The corruption must be purged. I still had the chills, my steps wobbly. "Move along," the deep brassy voice of one of the Nentael warriors rang out from nearby. The crowds were already filing out of the Archon's chamber, towards the pillared exits. I nearly jumped out of stealth mind, but remained steady. The silver kitty hadn't been talking to me specifically, but the crowd in general. Another peek back at the Archon's huge, unmoving body reminded me something was pretty scragged up. The Nentael who weren't ushering people towards the exits were gathering at the base of his 20 by 20 foot chair, their pikes raised. Overseer Dryfar was no longer in sight. I began to casually follow the crowds outside. The Archon Lumavari was supposed to have re-entered his body a moment ago, like the records said he did every year. Only that hadn't happened. The big guy was still in his statue-like slumber. Something had happened here, just like Tabalnak had predicted. Only it wasn't flashy, wasn't an attack. The Archon was dormant, unresponsive. Another cryptic message given alongside a trap. There wasn't much conversation among the crowd, only downcast gazes and taut shoulders. Nor were anyone's Aychuck fields particularly busy. Scrag, weird shit was going down, but it seemed like it was back to work for us. Off to pretend like everything was fine. I followed the crowd as it made its way outside. Soon I stood upon the tall balcony lining the Archon Tower's base, looking out over the spired planetoid city. The light had shifted again, bringing us into the evening cycle. The crowd began to disperse, boarding their hover discs towards their various destinations, and I followed. Half an hour later, I was back in my quarters, the purplish light of a simulated evening shining through the window blinds over my minimalist decor. I tried sending a few subtle messages to Tabalnak, but he had gone silent, so all I could do was wait. I sat down on my central cot and relaxed into a meditative posture. My Naiar body didn't really need sleep. Its nanite-regulated cells fed with enough Atra to power it for a good long while. But mentally, I was scrag and exhausted. Not sure what to do. Not sure how to process what was happening. So I took a deep breath in through my nose. In my head, I called up one of the meditative patterns for relaxation. It appeared in my vision as a cube, repeatedly unfolding itself into different shapes before reforming into smaller and smaller cubes. My body was growing relaxed, my limbs numbing, my heart rate slowing. I closed my eyes and immediately felt a pull. My psyche dragged forward as if I were being sucked out of my body, a whirring sensation, a touch of vertigo. Then I gazed upon an immense planet, hovering amid the starry void. It was alive, its entire surface composed of pulsating red flesh. Tendrils reached out from its surface, writhing in the coldness of space, as large as nations. There was a rend over nearly a third of its fleshy surface, a grand gaping hole that I felt myself pulled to. Closer and closer drew that monster world in its leering pit, until I was cast into darkness, swallowed within. There, within its hollowed cavity, waited a towering throne, atop it a figure, its face hidden in an elegant golden mask, its body cloaked in robes of matching gold and black. Behind it spread a mass of wings, or rather wings upon wings, folded over one another in a dizzying array, spreading out and out, melting and merging into tendrils and limbs and countless inset faces, eyes and mouths. The cloaked lord turned towards me, and from behind the slits of his mask there shone a cool black radiance. I expected malice in that starry gaze, but from him I sensed something more, a serenity, a stillness, with a vast, looming awareness hiding just beneath. He raised a single hand from his throne, gesturing towards me. I felt compelled to go forward, to meet that elder being face to face, to know him. But something within me resisted, with an animalistic terror, absolutely refused to approach. Instinctively, I darted backward. The cloaked lord vanished, though I could feel his presence surging towards me still. I continued to flee, the great throne room in the living planet fading before rapidly scrolling stars. There was a shift in awareness, a change in that weird, dreamy reality. I continued to zoom through a rapid tunnel of stars, but now things were different. I was not quite me, not Keph. Older, wiser. His presence was smooth, collected. His thoughts, slippery. I sat at the command chair of a ship. Ahead of me zoomed a panorama of stars, coasting forward, a tunnel of light against the black backdrop. My gut churned with anticipation. Glances to my side showed a starship interior that was elegant and advanced, not quite like anything I'd seen among the Naiar, but feeling comfortable, like home. In my aura was a sense of purpose, a sense of fatal finality, determination. I placed my hands on the command console, the ship slowed to stellar speed. I watched as a succession of familiar worlds coasted by, an orange sun gleaming in the periphery. And then the final all-too familiar world, Aruvis, an orb of greenery and muddy orange rock. A knowing came to me as I coasted towards it. I was saying goodbye to almost everyone I cared about. Goodbye to those that remained in the society. Goodbye to my love. Goodbye to even myself. Everything I had been. All I had learned. But I knew a core would remain. Enough to drive me forward. Enough to make the next step to... Oh, I realized. This one. The same as my dreams on Aruvis. Or that final brief vision in the past life sojourn. I steeled myself, mostly in passenger mode, as the unnamed pilot steered ahead, watching as the starship descended through the cloud cover, seeing the rugged contours of the verdant land below. Then the squadron of Ver Vigle appearing on the horizon, drawing closer, their crab-like features inspiring a mocking disgust in the pilot. He could feel his palms sweaty, his heart palpitating, but he knew what he needed to do. Letting go of his stealth mind, he appeared next to the nearest Vigle and unloaded his blasters. An explosion of searing light. A moment of pain, a disconnect, then the void of oblivion. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Space God Memoirs. Space God is written, performed, and produced by A.M. Arctos. Original musical score by Alpha Colors. Various sound effects created by Industrial Strength Records Incorporated. Please support this podcast by following, rating, and sharing on your favorite social media site. For further info on Space God, its creator, and various other opinions, musings, and thoughts, go to www.spacegodmemoirs.com. or follow me on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. If you enjoyed the Space God Memoirs, please consider supporting us by becoming a patron. Check out the Patreon link in our description to learn more.